And so next up, what we're going to be getting into is the setup menu, which is generally the setup of the camera, which has a lot of overlap and some pretty similar things to the custom menu. First option in here is to format the memory card. Formatting the memory card and deleting the pictures on the memory card are similar type things. You're kind of getting rid of the pictures. If I was to use the phone book analogy, deleting pictures is the equivalent of crossing them off with a line. Okay? Formatting is more like ripping the page out and putting a new page in the book. With deleting the images, they're still there. It's just the camera's not going to view them. And so one of the procedures that professional photographers have before they go out on an important shoot is they check their memory cards, see what's on them, make sure that they've been downloaded and backed up on hard drives, and then they format the memory card. It deletes the images and it reestablishes a line of communication with the camera, establishes a new folder for the images, and basically just cleans everything up for a nice starting point of a new series of pictures. And so this is something you want to do on a regular basis, formatting those memory cards. Saving the user settings is for the U1 and U2 settings. And so the way that you do this is you go set the camera up exactly the way you want it to for U1. And you go to the exposure mode you want, you set your camera into the focus mode that you want to be in, you set the metering, anything in the menu that you want, exactly the way you want it. Then come to this section in the menu and you would register this to either U1 or U2. And so you can obviously save two of these under U1 and U2. And it's a great system for switching back and forth between lots of camera changes when you want to make that change very, very quick. Now, if you want to just simply reset them back to defaults, you can simply go in and reset them and take out all the settings that you've had in there. Monitor brightness is the display on the back of the camera. It should be left at 0 in the middle. If it drifts in the future, you can brighten it up or darken it. Cleaning the image sensor, and this is done, best way to set this is for at startup and shutdown. So every time you turn the camera on and off, it shakes dust and tries to get it off the sensor. Leaving it there is good because it's constantly trying to keep it as clean as possible. There's no real downside to leaving it turned on. Now, if you do get something on your sensor, you're going to probably need to go into lock mirror up for cleaning. And what this does is it locks the mirror up, opens the shutter so that you can see the sensor in the camera. Now you'll need to take the lens off as well. And there's some tools that you will need. And here's the first step. The first tool that you'll need is an air blower, often known as a rocket blower. And what you do here is you simply just squeeze this and shoot a burst of air into the sensor, hopefully knocking off any dust or anything that's sticky on the sensor. I hold my camera upside down to help gravity, pull it off and get it out of that mirror box housing. And that usually will do the job if there's something that's stuck on there that the auto sensor won't be able to clean off. If there's still something on the sensor and you still have little specks in the sky, you may need to turn your camera in for professional cleaning, but if you want to do it yourself, what you can do is you can buy a swab and liquid solution. And what you'll do here is you'll put a couple of drops of liquid on the swab, and then you will take the swab and you will swipe it across the sensor, cleaning off the dust. Now, this is a process that not everyone feels comfortable doing, and so I don't recommend everybody does this. But if you feel comfortable with it, you have a steady hand, you're fine repairing little things, this is not that difficult to do. And so you can clean the sensor yourself. It is not likely to happen very often unless you're working in a very dusty environment. Now, it's still possible that that will not get off all the dust. And so there is one final step that you can go to called image dust off reference photo. So if your photos look like this, you have a serious dust problem, all right? What you do is you photograph a white sheet of paper, which will show you the dust on your sensor very clearly. You then come to dust off reference photo and you basically register the image. And what happens is the computer looks at it, figures out where all the dust is, clones it out, so the next time you take a picture, it doesn't have dust. Now, I don't like, as many other photographers, don't like the camera randomly cloning pixels over pixels. And so this is a last-ditch effort in which to clean up the sensor. And so If you're on safari in Africa, there's no place to get it clean, you don't have any of the right supplies, and you want to get rid of the dust, you could use this technique. You can read the instruction manual for a little bit more specific, detailed information on how to go through the process yourself. Scrolling down, flicker reduction. In some of the live view modes and movie modes with some video or some fluorescent lights, you may get a flicker. And you can change the hertz from 50 to 60 hertz to avoid that flicker and awkward look in the viewfinder. Time zone and date is pretty simple. I'm way off. I'm always trying to guess what time I actually will achieve this point. I know what day I'm going to do this class, and I'm way off on time. I thought it was going to be 1:15, and it's almost 3 o'clock. I don't know why I'm so far off on that. Oh, I'm going to have to fix that for the next time. But you simply put in the date and time here. Be reminded that this camera does not have Wi-Fi, and it does not know what time zone you're in and does not know about daylight savings time. So you have to change that manually when you get to that point. Language, okay, who recognizes this language right here? This, of course, is the very famous Klingon language, which I would be surprised if you saw on your camera or recognized, but I did have one student who recognized it straight away. And I was being extra geeky. I actually went on the internet, and not only did I want to get something that looked weird, I got the actual true Klingon language for Klingon. And this person recognized it and could read it. So choose the appropriate language here, obviously. You can tell it's getting late in the class, isn't it? Okay, auto image rotation. You want to have this turned on. When you shoot verticals, it'll automatically rotate verticals when you download them to your computer. That's a nice thing, saves you a lot of time. Battery info. This is nice. You can go in and you can see how many pictures you've taken on that charge of the battery. You get to see exactly what percentage it's good to and the general condition of the battery. So helpful information. Image comment. This is where you can go in and put something like "don't steal my photos," and it's attached to the metadata of all the photographs that you take. You could put in something more practical like your email address or your website. You could put in an email address of somebody you photographed while you're out traveling. You can put in anything you want here that'll fit into that little small area. Similar to that, copyright information. You can put in a copyright with your name. You can put in an artist, for instance, if it's your copyright, but there's somebody else who's actually shooting the pictures. Whatever information you want to put in here. Put in your name. If your camera gets stolen by a stupid thief and you somehow find it and you can say, "That's my camera," they could say, "No, it's not, it's my camera." And you could just go into the image copyright information and go, "See, it's got my name in there." And so that's a little bit of proof that it's your camera. Granted, they could write over their name in there pretty easily if they know what they're doing. But one more thing that you can do. All right, if you happen to purchase 2 or more of these 7100s and you get all the settings just right in one, rather than trying to go over to the other camera and get them all right over there, you can just save all the settings in one camera and just load them up into the other camera. My gut feeling is that this is designed for movies that are doing bullet time and they shoot with 100 of these cameras and they don't want to go through and reset everything on every camera 100 times. They could quickly just load up all the settings from one camera to the next. Unfortunately, it does not work from a D7000 to a D7100 or from a D800 or 600 to a D7100. It's only between exact models of camera. Virtual horizon, this is buried pretty deep in the menu. This is a little virtual horizon like a pilot has for leveling things. This is a good thing to link to the function button if you find this useful, so that you can have faster access to it. If you are using the older Nikon lenses, the ones that don't have the little chips in them, the CPU chips in them, you can go in and you can record, let's see, 9 lenses. So for instance, if you have a 50mm 1.8 lens, you could record that it's a 50mm lens, it's a 1.2 lens, and it would record that 50mm 1.2 lens information to the metadata for other information that you might use within Lightroom or other photo programs. And so it's a way to keep legacy lenses up to date with the metadata that's going on. All right, AF fine tune. You guys ready to geek out again? Get a little nerdy? All right, so focusing on this camera is incredibly good, but it's not perfect. Okay, remember that focusing system down below? That was predicting where the camera should focus, and in some cases it gets it just a shade wrong. So let's take a look at AF Fine Tune. Your camera wants to focus on the right subject, okay? But sometimes it focuses a little in front or perhaps a little in back of the subject, and this could happen in a matter of inches or millimeters, all right? So you might have a consistent problem of your camera front focusing or back focusing. So what you need to do is you need to calibrate your camera and adjust it. And here's how you do that. You take a focusing target. I use a fancy device called a ruler. And then you need a measuring device. And I use a thing called a yardstick. And I focus on the ruler and I see if I'm focused in the right area. Now, if these sorts of fancy devices are not fancy enough for you, you would like something official. You don't like this unofficial measuring devices. You can buy one of these Lens-Align Mark IIs for about $100. You focus on the little target on the left and you see if you are in focus on the right, because you can see if you're focusing in front or behind where you were supposed to do it. But in my low-tech system, this is what it looks like for me. And I'm going to focus on the ruler, and I'm going to look over on the right to see if the yardstick is properly in focus. So if I'm focused right, the number 10 should be exactly in focus. And with any lens, you're able to adjust -20 to +20. And these aren't millimeters, these are just increments. And so looking at these results, I would say that my camera needs to be fine-tuned to +5, somewhere between 0 and +10 in order to achieve perfect focus. And so if you're shooting with a really fast lens, everything from a 50-1.4, 85-1.4, 105 f2, 135 f2, 300 2.8, anything like that, and you really are trying to get the most out of your lenses and you're using them wide open, you probably should be fine-tuning your lenses. And what you're going to need to do this is you're going to need all your camera stuff. You're going to need that ruler, yardstick, cable release. You're going to need to set up your camera, manual, aperture priority, either one will work. You want to shoot at maximum aperture, all the best image quality possible. You're going to want to focus on your subject. Make sure that your camera's got the mirror lock-up on. Make sure you have vibration reduction off, because we talked about turning the vibration reduction off. And then what you're going to need to do is you need to manually unfocus the lens, let the camera focus on the target, lock the mirror up so there's no vibration, fire the shutter, play the image back, and then compare your images, see if they're sharp or not. And then if they're not, you go in and you adjust them plus or minus, and you may have to take several pictures to really figure out the problem. It took me about an hour to do this with about 5 or 6 of my lenses. So it takes a little bit of time, but if you have fast lenses and you're hyper picky, it's important to do. Looks like we may have a question in class.
Yeah, regarding fine-tuning there, where you were saying playback and magnify, is that something you can do while like shooting tethered or something if you don't want to magnify on the LCD?
Yeah, you can. For quick shooting, it actually the back of the screen is going to be accurate. If you zoom in, you'll be able to take a look on the measuring device if it's in the right area, but you'll be able to do it even better on a full screen of a computer. Yeah.
And it sounds like you said that you do fine-tune all of your lenses, but Mango 7 was asking if you do this to all of your lenses. I
do it to all my lenses just because I'm a gear nut. And if you have the standard kit lens that's the 18-105, that's a 3.5 to 5.6. Okay, let's just say your average shooting is around a 50 millimeter and you're shooting at like f4. Your depth of field, let's just say, is this. And if this is off by 2 millimeters, it's not going to make much difference. But if your depth of field is this little tiny area here, 2 millimeters is a pretty big difference. And so it's most important with very fast lenses, and typically more important with telephoto lenses than wide angles.
Excellent, thank you.
All right, next line is HDMI, and this is controlling your camera when it's connected up to an HD TV, and it controls the output resolution, and you can go in and set some controls so that your TV remote will be able to go forward and backward through pictures in your camera in a slideshow. If you do hook up the Nikon GP1 GPS unit to the camera, you can go in here and control various standby settings and how the camera uses the GPS unit within the camera. The wireless mobile adapter, the WU1A for transferring images to a smartphone, you can go in here and you can enable or disable this. If you leave it enabled, it will use more battery power, but if you want to get images transferred to your phone, that's the way you do it. Next up, there is a network setting too. If you are using this device here called a UT1, it's a communication unit. You can be transferring images to a computer through this. It's kind of like a wireless system, a little bit different. Most of the Nikon cameras don't have this, and it's not something commonly used with this camera, but it is another option for offloading images. You probably won't see this, or it will be grayed out. iFi card. An iFi card is a wireless card, another way of wirelessly getting your images off your camera. One of the things that you can do with an iFi card is that you can shoot to it and have images immediately downloaded to your computer, which is hopefully nearby. If you go out and shoot, what happens is as soon as you bring your camera near your computer, it automatically downloads the images to your computer. So it can be a very simple system for downloading because you never need to connect anything up. But the cards cost a little bit more. They're in very specific sizes, so you do have to kind of check into the whole iFi system if you want to get into that. And then finally, the firmware version. The software in the camera that runs all the operations, the menu and the picture taking, is called firmware. It needs to have something in there. And from time to time, they have updates. And they've had 2 updates since this camera came out. The camera is now at version 1.01. And if you go into your camera, and I know this camera here is at version 1.00, you can update the firmware on your camera. You can go to Nikon's website and they will give you a link to how to download the new firmware. And just a few days ago, they came out with a new lens update, which is 1.009. And what this information has is the distortion control, chromatic aberration control problems that are in lenses that the cameras can read. And so remember, if you talked about the distortion, it just knows about more lenses now. And so if you don't have the current firmware version, go to your regional Nikon website. There will be a download for the firmware and instructions on how to install it. In very brief words, what you do is you download the software to your computer, you put it onto a memory card, you put the memory card in the camera, you go to firmware version, and you update the camera. And it usually takes a few minutes to upload it. And it's free, and they've fixed little bugs, so why not go ahead and do it? And keep your eye on it. Usually about every 6 to 9 months, they often have an update fixing various little features in the camera. The final, well, I guess it's not the final tab, the second to the final tab is the retouch menu. And this is the one we're going to spend the least amount of time on, because this is where you go into an image, you make a copy, a JPEG copy, and you do goofy things to it, like add a fisheye effect or resize it. One option here that's pretty good is it has a raw processing, so if you shoot a raw image, you can create a JPEG copy of it for quick offloading if necessary. And so when you're stuck in the airport with nothing to do for hours and hours and hours in, and a little bit of extra space and memory on your card, go ahead and play around to your heart's content. Other than that, we're not going to spend much time on this. The final tab is recent settings. So every place that you have gone recently will show up within recent settings. So if you're trying to remember where you were doing something, this is a good place to check. However, I would recommend going into Choose Tab and changing it over to My Menu. And what happens at that point is that you can go to Add Items, and you go through a list of all the Nikon features in the menu, and you can add about 6 or 7 items that you use on a regular basis. So that when you hit the menu button, you immediately come to My Menu, the things that you use most of the time, and they're there for you, and you don't have to hunt for them throughout the rest of the menu. So these are kind of like the radio stations that you have preset in your car. They're there, they're quick, they're what you use all the time, and it's very simple to go through that. And so I highly recommend taking a little bit of time and going through and customizing that to your desire. And with that, we have come to an end of basically everything in the camera. So that's everything on the outside, that's everything on the inside.
Daily Shooter was asking about flash, and they were curious how many off-camera flash zones can this D7100 control?
I don't know that number off the top of my head. I know that you can handle several flashes within several groups. I know the maximum number might blow most people's budget on flashes. It's not a small number like 3 or 4 or 5. It might be 9 or 20 or 30, or it might even be unlimited.
Okay.
It's a big number.
Okay, good to know. And in terms of video, H. Gusky was asking, does the picture control settings and color space matter for video settings, like picture profiles on Canon? For example, would it be better to shoot video with the neutral profile?
Well, it depends a little bit on what you're doing with your video, but it's an excellent question because when you shoot video, you are shooting to a video file which is not a raw file. It is a compressed, shaped file, you might say. And so the picture controls, the picture modes do matter. And so where you have your saturation and your color set is kind of important. Now, it depends on who you are and what you're doing. Mom and pop shooting landscape and travel photographs probably want to get a nice vivid image that they don't have to mess with later on. Somebody who's shooting more professionally might want to shoot more neutral toned so that they have more room to play with in post. And so different folks for different strokes for different folks. And so think about how you want to use that video and how much work you want to do later on, and that's going to dictate how you set the camera up ahead of time. And so be your own best judge there. Okay,
great. And then we had a few, there are always some competitive questions about this camera versus that camera. Yul Herme asks, is it worth upgrading from the D5100 to the D7100? Most reviews are saying the difference isn't enough to validate the change. I don't do much video, but what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, well, on any sort of upgrade, the ultimate question is are the additional features of use to you? That's what it really comes down to. So the one feature that the 5200 doesn't have that a lot of people have gripes on, and the reason it doesn't have is because Nikon specifically left it out for this. It's an upgrade reason, why you want to upgrade. When you're in manual control, you have your apertures and you have your shutter speeds, front and back. 2 dials, dedicated dials, very easy to work with. With the 5200, you have 1 dial, you don't get the dial in the front. So you have to kind of share time back and forth switching between shutter speeds and apertures. And anyone who works manually very much, you know, it's like having shared time in a studio. You don't get to use it when you want to use it sometimes. And it just is a little bit cumbersome to go around that all the time. And it's a minor little feature. And I could go into other features. It's got better autofocus. It's got better this, better that. But that's just kind of one simple operation. And that's kind of the difference between this and the 5200, is this has a lot more controls right on the outside that you can quickly access. The 5200, in my opinion, is one of the best values in camera because it has a good number of these features in the camera for a lower price. And so if you don't mind spending the extra time and button presses getting to those features, it's got them. It's just not quite as easy to get to and navigate. And so it depends on how you do your photography and what's important to you. Okay. Now the second question dealt with video, and if you could refresh me on the video aspect.
They just said that they won't be using video as often, so it wasn't a priority when they were comparing cameras.
Okay, yeah.
Reboot, On Air, and Ruler in Peace, all 3 of those people in the chat rooms were asking, how is Nikon D7100 versus Nikon D600, D300, or Canon 7D?
Okay, so there's a lot of different options there. Let's see, D600, the big difference with Nikon is that's a full frame sensor. And I think for the average enthusiast, it's going to be hard to find a better camera than this on the market. And to go to the full frame, you are going to be spending a lot of money, more money on the camera, not that much more, but more money on the camera, but you're going to need to spend more money on the lenses to really make that one sing as it should. And so there is a financial cost for most everybody. And so to upgrade from this, it's a noticeable hit. You almost need to double your budget when going up to a 600. And it's not really fair to do that comparison if you have to double your budget to do it. But given this camera and a D600, I'd take D600 in an instant. I like the large sensor on it. Pretty much everything that this one does, the D600 does. There's very few things that this one does that the D600 doesn't do. But you're going to spend more money on the camera and more on the lenses. Now, compared to the Canon 7D, it's a pretty comparable camera. It's 3 years newer running. As far as autofocusing, this has more focusing points, but number of focusing points is not always the most important. For instance, you could go, how many cross points does it have? And I guess it's pretty equal then. It's a pretty close call between this and the Canon 7D. Canon 7D is 8 frames a second, and this one is 6, unless you put it in the 1.3 crop mode. So the Canon 7D is a little bit more robustly built than this, and is a little bit bigger handle, which some people like. This one, in general, though, is 3 years newer technology, so there's a lot of new upgrades to it. So I would consider the 7D still a slightly higher end camera, but we're also, those of us who are watching the rumor sites are expecting a Canon 7D Mark II at some point in the near future. And the Nikon D300 is a hard camera to compare it to because that camera is 3.5 years old, and that's just basically a very small upgrade from a camera that's about 5 years old. And we're also expecting a D400 at some point in the future. That may or may not happen. It's a little hard to tell whether what Nikon is going to do. Okay. So some thoughts on comparison.
You're like the camera forecaster, like slight chance of rain.
I know. There's some theories that when this one came out, they said it was the flagship of the APS models, which for this size sensor, and everyone was like, well, what about the D300? That one's supposed to be the best, and maybe we're going to have a D400. And so it's possible Nikon may just say, no D400. If you want a better camera, get a D600. Or they may come out with a D400. It's hard to say. They could also be sitting there with one just completely ready, and they're just looking over at Canon going, are you going to do a 7D Mark II? Because then we'll do this one. If you don't do that, then we're not going to do this. If you haven't been following Canon and Nikon for the last 3 years, they've come out with almost same price, same feature cameras within a couple months of each other. And so the real comparison is with the newly introduced Canon 70D. And so that'll be an interesting one as soon as we can actually get our hands on that one.